please turn to Matthew chapter 27, verses 62 through 66. Some students challenged Dr. Simon Greenleaf, who was the founder and head of the Harvard Law School for 30 years. They challenged him to take his laws of legal evidence and to apply them to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, Dr. Greenleaf wrote 3 volumes called The Laws of Legal Evidence, and they are the standard for evaluating evidence in the courtroom around the world. And Dr. Greenleaf was challenged to take those laws of legal evidence and to apply them to the Gospels, and particularly to apply them to the resurrection. He studied for some time. As a matter of fact, he wrote a book after his studies. It was called The Testimony of the Four Evangelists. And when he finished his investigation, he made a very startling statement. He said, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is substantiated by more and better evidence than any fact of ancient times. And he laid out in his book why. But I'd like to go over some of the sorts of evidence that Dr. Greenleaf found as he studied about the life of Jesus, and particularly about the resurrection. Because the Christian faith stands or falls with the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. If he did not come out of the tomb alive, bodily, 3 days after he was crucified, then we're here in vain, and the Christian faith is a fraud. In fact, it's not just a fraud, it's a vicious fraud. So let us read some of those circumstantial evidences. You know, the Bible tells those who believe in Jesus that they should always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within them. And this is part of knowing how to give a reason for that hope. Let's look at Matthew chapter 27, verse 62. Now on the next day, which is the one after the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I am to rise again. Now, here we have a strange scene. Jesus has been crucified. His execution had been engineered by the religious leaders of Israel. They had forced the Roman governor, Pilate, to execute him by crucifixion. And now they are concerned because Jesus had made a prophecy on several occasions. He had said that he predicted that he was going to be taken, imprisoned, beaten, and then crucified. But he also predicted he was going to rise again from the dead on the 3rd day. As a matter of fact, he predicted that everything that he taught, lived for, and would die for would only be true if he came out of the grave alive on the 3rd day. In other words, he hazarded everything that he lived and died for on the premise that he would come back alive on the 3rd day. And he didn't just say he would come back in spirit to them. He said he would come back bodily and physically alive as well. Now that's important because there have been other religious leaders who have said they would come back to their followers in spirit. Lord Krishna of the Hindus said that he would do that. Mary Baker Glover Patterson Eddy said that there is no death. Her tomb is still with us, and her body is still in it. There have been many who have said that they would come back to their followers in spirit. But Jesus predicted that he would come back bodily alive, so that there couldn't be some illusion or some imagination involved. He would come back in real flesh and blood. And so, when you stop and think about this, and this is one of the things that startled Dr. Greenleaf, because it would have been enough to have lived and taught the things that Jesus did. He was still been one of the greatest religious leaders of all times. No one ever taught like he did. No one ever taught a system of ethics as he did. No one ever taught it before or ever improved on it since. So why did he hazard everything that he lived for and died for on the proposition that it would only be true if he came out of the grave alive on the third day? The obvious reason is that he absolutely knew that he would. And so these religious leaders who did not accept his claims, they were concerned because, as they go on to say here, verse 64, they say, "Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the third day, lest the disciples come and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first." Well, this got Pilate's attention. No one had to draw him a picture to see that if they almost had a complete insurrection in his domain while Jesus was alive, that he would be in sure trouble with Caesar, with the great uproar that would happen if the disciples could come and steal the body and make it appear that Jesus' prophecy actually had been fulfilled. So, as Dr. Greenleaf said, in evaluating the evidence, he had every reason to make sure that body was not stolen and that it remained in that tomb. And also the religious leaders had every reason to make sure, because their very animosity, their very hatred of Jesus guarantees they would have done everything to have made sure that body was not stolen and made it appear that he had been raised from the dead. As a matter of fact, it would have caused much more trouble than Jesus ever did when he was alive. And so they had every reason, every motive to make sure that body was not stolen. So we read in verse 65, Pilate said to them, "You have a guard." Literally, take a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how. Pilate knew that he could trust them to take a guard and make it as secure as was necessary. You see, the very political ambition of Pilate, which had been that part of him that had been twisted by the religious leaders in the first place to make him condemn a man that he openly said was innocent. That very political ambition caused him to want that grave to be made secure. So he told these men, go make it as secure as you can. In verse 66, they begin to tell us some of the things that they did to make sure that Jesus would not be raised from the dead. And they went and made the grave secure, along with the guard, and they set a seal on the stone. All right, there are 4 things here that we want to note that make up very strong evidence about the tomb. First, he said, go make the grave secure. What this means is that they would send carefully trained Roman soldiers to the tomb, and they would check out the tomb completely. First thing they would do, since every Roman soldier knew that failure on guard duty meant execution, so the first thing they would do would be to make sure the body was there. Then they would check out all of the surroundings, and they would secure that so that it could be kept, and so that their watch would be effective. So when they made it secure, it means that they checked every detail of what they were being entrusted with, because their lives depended upon it. Secondly, it says they set a guard. These were not just ordinary guards. These were Roman legionnaires. A legionnaire was trained for 5 years before he was considered ready for real battle. These were part of the Roman 10th Legion, the garrison that guarded Jerusalem. They had been decorated in many battles. They were excellent soldiers. In a maximum security case of this type, according to the Institutes of the Roman Legions by Vegetius, this is a manuscript that goes back to the 2nd century A.D. According to those Institutes of the Roman Legions, in a maximum security case, they would station 16 Roman soldiers at a watch. They did this because they were trained to fight in battle squares, and they considered 16 men sufficient to stand off an army until reinforcements could get there. What they would do is if they were threatened, they would form a square, 4 men on a side. And those soldiers knew how to fight within a 6 square foot area, each soldier 6 square feet, in an overall square so they could stand off an army. So they posted these members of the 10th Legion to guard the tomb of Jesus. And after all, they were guarding it against whom? They were guarding it against the followers of Jesus. Well, they weren't very impressive at this point. In fact, one had betrayed him, and there were 11 that were chosen as his leaders, called apostles. And when Jesus was taken prisoner, all of them fled in terror. And at this time they were behind hidden doors, but they had sufficient power there to stand off an army. Now, another factor here, a third part of the evidence, is they set a seal on the stone. Now, this was something that was done in a case that was considered a matter of great consequence to the state. When they set a seal, sealing something, they would take a dab of wax. And in this case, they put a dab of wax on the solid rock face of this cliff out of which the tomb was cut, and a dab of wax on the great stone that was rolled over the door of this tomb, and then they stretched a thong across it and pressed it into the wax. And then the seal of Tiberius Caesar would be impressed into the wax. Now, everyone in the Roman Empire knew the penalty for breaking a seal of Caesar. The penalty was execution. And all the power of Rome would go after you if you broke the seal of Caesar. And that was what was placed on the tomb of Jesus. The power of Rome backed the holding of that tomb closed. All the power of Rome. The fourth evidence that we have about the tomb of Jesus is that they rolled a stone there. In Mark chapter 16, verse 4, when the followers of Jesus came and they were hoping to anoint the body of Jesus, it says this, "And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large." Now that's the point. There was an extremely large stone that was rolled into place over this tomb. Many of you probably have seen my book, The Prophetical Walk Through the Holy Land.